Foundation kicks it all off, set in the late years of Harry Seldon and the twilight years of the Empire. Seldon is a psychologist and mathematician, and a pioneer in the field of psychohistory, which uses both to present a statistical analysis of society to depict the likely events. He and his fellow psychohistorians have determined that the collapse of the empire is inevitable, leading to 30,000 years of barbarism before it is finally reunited again. Well, this smacks of treason to those in power, and Seldon and his cohorts are placed on trial. But he convinces the authority that what he's saying is true, and that the work he and his people are doing is not intended to threaten the empire, but rather to prepare for the inevitable so that the period of barbarism can be reduced to a mere 1,000 years. His plan is simple. We're going to create an encyclopedia. Yeah, apparently civilization can be saved by Wikipedia, the first and only time that will ever be suggested. Still, the authorities grudgingly agree to leave him to this on the condition that this foundation be on the planet Terminus, which is far off from the galactic center of Trantor, where their nerdiness isn't going to bother anybody. 50 years later, and the huge settlement that was necessary to write this encyclopedia has now turned into an actual community. But the encyclopedia is still the be-all and end-all as far as those in charge are concerned, even more so than their Dungeons and Dragons night, so you know that they take this seriously. Things are getting worse, though, when 4 neighboring worlds secede from the Empire and begin plotting against each other, with Terminus stuck in the middle. With no metals to support industry of any kind, Terminus is helpless. All they have is the sum of all knowledge at their disposal, but that won't be terribly helpful. Knowledge is power, but so are atom blasts, and a mite easier to use to kill people. But the leadership still doesn't see the threat. The Empire will protect them, they keep insisting, no matter how much the mayor, Salvor Hardin, insists that the Empire doesn't know what's going on out here, and even if they did, they don't give 2 shits. If they did, they wouldn't have let the 4 kingdoms secede in the first place. Finally, the leadership is shocked back to reality by a pre-recorded message from Harry Seldon on the anniversary, which announces that this situation was not only foreseen, but it is critical to his plans. The double meaning of Foundation is that it doesn't just mean that it's a scientific organization, the foundation for the Encyclopedia Galactica, but it will itself be the foundation on which the new empire will be built. The encyclopedia is a ruse. The real purpose was to establish this group in this place at this time. As far as Seldon is concerned, they can take that encyclopedia and shove it up their asses. So, in the wake of this reveal, the demoralized authority is quickly pushed aside by the formerly powerless mayor. He takes total control of the government, and then takes total control of the situation. Hardin uses a balance of powers initially to keep any one of the kingdoms from annexing Terminus. You see, all of the 4 kingdoms have lost their nuclear capability, but Terminus is still just as advanced as ever. And if any one system were to get a hold of Terminus, they would have nuclear power. Those with nuclear power can develop nuclear bombs, and that's all she wrote for the other 3 kingdoms. So all 4 are stuck in a situation where none of them can seize control of Terminus because the other 3 won't allow it. Then he makes the next move, a long game to take advantage of their scientific ignorance. These people are so backwards by now that they see technology as a kind of magic. So he establishes a religion that will tend to those reactors and handle things like medicine and gadgetry, and all of that in the name of the galactic spirit, providing the barbarian kingdoms with modern conveniences and reinforcing the idea that the king is the ruler by divine right. But this seeming capitulation on Hardin's part, in training their people to use the technology, that's actually a subversion. When one kingdom attempts to conquer the Foundation, the religious backlash shuts down their technology and warships, forcing the kingdoms into a treaty that effectively puts the Foundation in charge, and Salvor Hardin feeling pretty pleased with himself over his own cleverness. Well, that works so well, the Foundation figures they'll spread this religion far and wide and use that to gain political power over other worlds. Shockingly, though, few worlds accept Foundation missionaries just because they know it's going to lead to a complete takeover of their government. Some people. Merchant princes instead begin to arise, and among them is the trader Hober Mallow. Mallow was originally hired to see if Corel had nuclear technology, and Mallow discovers that Corel is actually backed by some remnants of the Empire. There's also an incident where a Foundation missionary tries to get asylum on Mallow's ship, but instead Mallow turns him over to Corel because the laws of both that world and the Foundation say that missionaries are forbidden here, so the missionary isn't entitled to any kind of protection. Well, you can imagine the backlash against Mallow when he comes back to the Foundation, and he's put on trial for murder for allowing the missionary to be taken away for execution. Except he reveals the truth. It wasn't a real missionary. This was a test. The missionary was just an undercover Corellian agent. Riding the wave of public support and having earned a shitload of money on the deal with Corell, Mallow gets elected mayor. But later on, when Corell declares war on the Foundation, Mallow fights back in an unexpected way. He cuts off all trade. Without that, the citizens and businesses of Corell begin to suffer, until finally the government is forced to capitulate. And Mallow is celebrated as a visionary on par with Seldon and Hardin. Alternate history is a common intellectual game. What if Lincoln had missed his trip to the theater? What if the weather hadn't conspired against the Chinese invasion of Japan? What if someone had assassinated Hitler? In the face of such things, psychohistory seems absurd. History is made by seemingly trivial things that you couldn't possibly predict. But let's explore psychohistory on the assumption that it works as presented. The idea then is that this isn't about predicting specifics, just the general direction of things. For instance, while numerous tiny little things could have prevented the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that kicked off the First World War, it's also understood that that war was inevitable. Europe was a powder keg waiting to explode. That just happened to be the match that set it off. If not that, something else. Or so psychohistory would say. The assassination of Ferdinand specifically wouldn't be the factor, just one of numerous possible factors that was in play to ensure that the world would have this conflict, and that one side would receive sufficient support to triumph over the other, that this conflict would precipitate the revolution in Russia, that an enraged victor would put punitive terms for the loser, that would set the stage for the Second World War, and so on. None of this would have predicted that a Hitler would rise up because of that conflict, but it would predict the nature of such a conflict. Another example might be the events which occurred in the real world in the decades following Asimov's release of Foundation. The civil rights movement had many great figures, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, just to name a couple, and also both men were assassinated. While the contributions to the movement are immeasurable, their deaths didn't change the inevitable outcome. With psychohistory, there would have been such leaders predicted because the time had come for the movement, and like Salvor Hardin, someone would arise to be that person. Someone great, because only great men and women would emerge at the front of this movement in order to develop it. And even if they were to fall, their legacy would ensure that the movement would continue. Psychohistory may discount the individual, but it recognizes that great individuals will arise under the circumstances. The second essential point to remember is that psychohistory is a statistical science, one whose results are based upon probability and not certainty. The mere fact that the future can be changed indicates that. You can alter events to make some things more likely than others, hence the establishment of the Foundation. For instance, an aristocracy might have a king or a queen arise that decides, for reasons of personal consideration, that they will institute a sweeping reform and have the charisma and support to ensure that the dissent is not strong enough to counter this effort, even if the forces in place say the status quo should remain. A person at the right place at the right time could set things in motion that would steer it towards the more unlikely event. That's why, as Seldon told the Foundation, he deliberately reduced their options to one in these instances, so that they would have no choice but to follow his plan whenever what would be known as a Seldon crisis would take place. By limiting their choices, it simplified the possibilities of what could happen and further improved the odds that their predictions would be correct. The common theme amongst these stories is this adherence to tradition in the face of change. For instance, the nobles back on Trantor, who believe that this is some kind of attempt at an uprising, rather than recognizing, no, these people really do believe this is going to fall and are trying to stop it. They see it as just another power play, because all they know on Trantor are a bunch of power plays. Or take the encyclopedists, who have believed so strongly that the empire can do whatever it wants, that when threatened, believe that the empire will still protect them, even though the empire is not stopping these kingdoms from breaking away. And then, when Salvor Hardin sets up his plan of training and setting up this religion, other people think, no, that's not the way that you are going to stop these powers. You're capitulating. Instead of recognizing he's thinking in a new way. He's not trying to win this through force of arms. He's trying to win this through force of mind, outthinking them. And then when it comes to Mallow, they try to get the religion thing to continue now that they've seen that it works, sticking with the old ways. And Mallow says, look, that worked then. This is now. Nobody buys into this religion anymore. You have to try something new. So the common theme we have, those who adhere to the past alone fall. Those who are prepared to innovate and seize the moment, those are the ones that get ahead. The solutions to all three Seldon crises are based on the same general idea. You control the technology, you control the world. In the first case, technology was controlled by the balance of power, Hardin offering all four kingdoms help in maintaining their technology so long as they left Terminus alone. In the second case, while religion was at work, the religion was what was used to control those who controlled the technology, compelling them to shut it down and thus deny its use to the people until capitulation. In the third, it wasn't money exactly, but the technological dependency of the trade that forced the hand. The inability to use what you had because the infrastructure that supports it is no longer properly being supplied caused the problem for both individuals and corporations that eventually demanded that the war end. Different approaches, but the same idea is at its root. Next time, Foundation and Empire, and the rules change.